Okay, so today we're diving into a case that really captivated the nation. It's the serial killings by Stephen Dean Gordon and Frank Cano. And you guys sent in some seriously in-depth research on this. We've got court documents, police reports, we even have text message transcripts.
Wow.
Yeah. So our mission today is to unpack not just the details, the chilling details of what they did, but also try to understand, the psychology of this partnership and see if maybe, just maybe, there were some missed opportunities to, stop this from happening.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating case and definitely disturbing. And you're right, there's a lot to unpack. A lot more than just what we see on the surface.
Right, exactly. So let's start with their early lives. One of the things that really stuck out to me was the contrast in their backgrounds.
Hmm.
Gordon, he was born in 1969, seemed to have a pretty normal upbringing, grew up in California, went to high school, even worked at Disneyland.
Disney.
Yeah,
Nice.
not exactly who you picture when you think about.
Right, right. A serial killer.
Yeah.
The Disneyland thing it always comes up, and it makes you wonder, how can someone who had like what seems like a really normal life end up doing something so horrific?
Yeah.
But if you dig a little deeper, there were signs early on. In 1992, Gordon was accused of molesting his young niece.
That's right. And he,
And
he pleaded guilty at first, but then later he took it back, said his
yeah,
girlfriend had pressured him into it.
exactly. And that brings up a really interesting question. Was it a false confession? Or was that like the first sign of manipulation?
Yeah.
And a lack of respect for boundaries. It's just
Yeah.
a detail that, looking back, it just seems way more ominous.
Yeah, it's like a foreshadowing in a way.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Kamas knows early life. He was born in 86. His life was very different from what I read. There was a lot of poverty. And he was bullied a lot. And tragically, he was also caught abusing his niece when he was just a teenager. Yeah.
It's awful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad because, these early instances of abuse,
Yeah.
while they're different, they were different in how serious they were, it could point to a pattern of predatory behavior
Mm.
and a real lack of empathy, something that could have been addressed, if there was some early intervention.
Right.
We often focus on like why serial killers do what they do, but maybe we should be asking when.
Mm-hmm.
When did things start to go wrong? Could therapy or something, especially when they were younger, could that have changed their path? We can't know for sure.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to think about.
It's heartbreaking to think about all those missed opportunities.
Right.
All right, so moving on. Gordon, he got married eventually, had a daughter, but things really started to fall apart. His ex-wife even said that he was becoming more and more unstable and threatening.
Right. And then things escalated big time. In 2001, Gordon kidnapped his ex-wife and his daughter. He took them to Nevada. Thankfully, they were found safe. But, this incident, it shows a real disregard for the law and a willingness to use force to get what he wanted. A major red flag.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it didn't lead to any real intervention.
And he ended up in prison for it, right?
Yes, and that's actually a really important turning point in this whole story because Cano also ended up in prison for a different crime. And both of them were later paroled and had to wear ankle monitors.
Yeah.
And they were both specifically forbidden from having any contact with other known sex offenders
Yeah.
because of their pasts. And it makes what happened next so much more disturbing.
So this is where the idea of parole comes in. It's when a prisoner is released early, before they've served their full sentence. But there are rules, and they're monitored to keep the public safe. And ankle monitors, those are a big part of that. Right. So both Gordon and Cano, they ended up meeting at an auto shop where Gordon was working. They became friends, and some people even thought maybe they were romantically involved, although Gordon always denied that.
Okay,
so, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, the shared experience, being on parole. Plus, they both had these troubled pasts. It must have created a bond. They were both kind of living on the edges of society, carrying the weight of their crimes. And maybe they found some comfort in each other.
But that comfort, it seems like it took a dark turn because they didn't just, hang out. They actually cut off their ankle bracelets and took first to Alabama, and then they went to Las Vegas.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they were on the run. That just shows a complete disregard for authority. Like they thought they could outsmart the system. And remember, at this point, they were already living on borrowed time. And sadly, this escape was just the beginning of something much darker. This is where the story takes a really, really dark turn. In March of 2014, workers at a recycling center in Anaheim, they made a horrible discovery. They found the body of a young woman in the trash. She was later identified as Jerry Estep.
God. It's hard to even imagine finding something like that. Jari Stepp, she was only 21 years old. She had just come to California from Oklahoma City, and her life was cut short. Just like that.
It's awful. This discovery launched a huge investigation.
Mhm.
And the police quickly found out that E. Stepp had been involved in sex work. And her death, it made them think maybe there were other missing women in similar situations.
And they were right, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Investigators from Anaheim and Santa Ana, they started working together. And they came up with 3 more names: Josephine Vargas, Martha Anaya, and Kiana Jackson. All women who had just vanished.
So how did they connect Gordon and Cano to all of this?
Well, what's really interesting is how they used technology to crack the case. Remember, Gordon and Cano had cut off their ankle monitor.
Right, before they went on the run.
Yeah, but the police were able to use data from those monitors to place both of them at the places where these women were last seen.
It's like they left a trail without even realizing.
Exactly, like a digital breadcrumb trail. But there's more. The investigators, they found something else. A can of spray foam near Sepp's body.
Hmm.
And that can, it ended up being a key piece of evidence. Fingerprints on the can. They led the police straight to the auto shop where Gordon worked.
Wow.
It really shows how important forensics are in these kinds of cases.
It's amazing how they put it all together.
Yeah.
You know, the ankle monitors, the spray foam can, the fact that all these women had disappeared, it all pointed to Gordon and Cano.
Yeah, it's a real testament to good police work and cooperation between different departments. But the most disturbing part, it was still to come. Gordon, he confessed. During a 13-hour interrogation, he confessed to killing not just 4, but 5 women.
5. So all the women we've talked about, plus 1 more.
Exactly. And his confession, it wasn't just a simple, I did it. He gave him all these details about how he and Cano did it, how they would trick women into getting into Gordon's car. Cano would be hiding in the back seat, and then they would drive to this empty lot near the auto shop.
Like they had it all planned out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary. It just shows how calculated they were. They used deception and force to get what they wanted. And Gordon, he kept talking. He described how they would assault their victims and then strangle them. He even said that Martha Anaya, she almost escaped. She fought back. She was so strong.
God, it's
Huh.
awful to think about what she went through.
It really is. And then on top of Gordon's confession, the police found something else. Text messages between Gordon's and Cano. And these weren't just normal messages, like making plans to meet up. They were talking about their victims. They even talked about different ways to kidnap and kill them.
It's just chilling how they could talk about these things so casually.
It's disturbing. But these messages, they tell us a lot about how they were thinking. They show a complete lack of empathy. It's like their victims were just objects to them. And it's almost like they were getting off on it, bragging to each other.
It's sick.
But there's something else that's really unsettling about this. Gordon confessed to 5 murders, but he could only give details about 4. For the 5th victim, he could only remember a few things. He said he picked her up in Compton. That's about it.
So did they ever find out who she was? The 5th victim?
Well, based on what little Gordon could remember, and a lot of police work, they think the 5th victim was Sable Pickett. She was 19 years old. She went missing in February of 2014. But there's no real proof. So, sadly, her case is still open.
It's hard to imagine not knowing what happened.
It is. And it makes you realize how important it is to find answers, to give families some closure.
Okay. Let's talk about the trials. Gordon and Cano were tried separately, right?
Yeah. And their trials were very different. Gordon, he decided to represent himself.
Himself?
Yeah. Which is a risky move, to say the least. He pleaded not guilty at first, but then all of a sudden he changed his plea to guilty.
Why would he do that? I mean, he was facing some serious charges.
It's hard to know for sure.
Yeah.
But some people think he might have wanted to control the story. They have the last word. But there's another thing. During the trial, Gordon started blaming his parole officers. He said they didn't monitor him and Cano properly. He even said that they were partly responsible for the murders because they let him hang out with another sex offender.
So he was trying to shift the blame.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder about the whole parole system. Did it fail? Could things have been different? Could these murders have been prevented? These are all questions that need to be asked.
It's a scary thought. What about Cano's trial?
His trial was more straightforward. He pleaded guilty to all 4 murders, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
So 2 very different outcomes for 2 men who did such terrible things.
Yeah, it's complicated. The legal system is full of twists and turns, and the choices that people make, they can have a big impact on the outcome. In Gordon's case, his decision to represent himself and all the outbursts he had in court, they probably played a role in him getting the death penalty.
So where are they now?
Gordon is on death row at San Quentin State Prison. And Cano, he's serving his life sentence. And while justice has been served, in a way, these crimes, they left a mark, a permanent scar, on the community.
It's just a reminder that life is precious and that violence can have such devastating consequences. There's something else we need to talk about. We've talked about what happened, the evidence, the trials, but we haven't really talked about why. Why did they do it? What can we learn from Gordon and Cano's background and their behavior? Yeah, it feels like we're missing something, you know? Like we've only scratched the surface of why they did this. Is there anything in their pasts or, you know, their psychology that could give us any clues?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? The one that everyone wants to know. Why?
Right.
Why do some people, even people who seem normal, you know, why do they commit these horrific acts of violence?
Yeah, like with Gordon. You think about him working at Disneyland with families, with kids,
Mhm.
and then you find out what he actually did. It's hard to wrap your head around it.
It really is. It makes you question everything you think you know about people.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that evil can hide anywhere, even in the most ordinary places. It's a pretty scary thought.
It is. And then there's Cano. Okay, so he had a rough childhood, but does that explain everything? Was he just going along with Gordon? Or was he more of a driving force, you know, in all of this?
That's tough to say for sure. I mean, remember, Gordon said that Cano was totally on board with it. But Cano, he tried to downplay his role at first.
But then there are those text messages. You can't ignore those. They were talking about the victims, planning how to do it. It's just, how can anyone be so cold?
It's disturbing, yeah. But those messages, they're also important because they give us a glimpse into how these guys were thinking. No empathy. Zero. And this weird camaraderie. You know, like they were bonding over these terrible things, sharing them with each other. It's like it was fueling their sick fantasies.
So where does that leave us? Can we learn anything from all of this? Anything that could help stop something like this from happening again?
That's what we all want to know, right?
Yeah.
Can we prevent these tragedies? Are there warning signs, ways to intervene before it's too late?
Like the things we talked about before, the abuse, the escalating violence, the way they just ignored the rules.
Exactly. It's about catching it early.
Yeah.
Maybe by being more aware in schools, in families, and just in our communities. And then getting people the help they need, maybe, just maybe, that could make a difference.
It's a complex issue, though. There's no easy solution.
You're right. There's no magic formula for stopping these things from happening. People are complicated. And there are so many factors that contribute to violence.
Yeah, and like we saw in this case, it's a mix of things. Psychology, social factors, maybe even flaws in the system.
Absolutely. We have to look at it from every angle. We need to keep researching, understand the psychology behind violence better. We need more resources for mental health, early intervention, and we need to take a hard look at our criminal justice system, see what we can improve.
This has been a really heavy, deep dive, but it's been important. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from this case?
For me, it's a reminder that evil can be anywhere. You can wear a mask, blend in, look like something completely normal. We can't forget that. It's the only way we can start to understand and maybe prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again.
It's a scary thought, but it's a reminder that we have to be aware, protect ourselves, and pay attention to the signs. We may never fully understand what goes on in people's minds, but we have to keep trying. The more we understand, the better chance we have of making the world a safer place, a better place.